Real Agriculture presents the Bushels and Bytes podcast, brought to you by the Canadian Agri-Food Automation and Intelligence Network. Welcome, everybody, to the Bushel and Bytes podcast, brought to you by Kane here on RealAgriculture.com. I'm excited to bring in our next guest, somebody I've known for a very long time. It is Joe Dales. Hey, Joe, how's it going?
Good, Shaun.
Hey, Joe. Okay, so introduce yourself to the audience. You've done a lot of cool stuff in this whole tech and innovation space. Give us the quick hits.
Perfect. Yeah, thanks, Shaun. And happy to be here and really proud of all your growth and progress too. From a farming family in Ontario. Grew up, I think my father wanted us to learn how to grow food. My grandfather and father were products of the Depression, so we grew everything on a small farm. And I think growing up, I got the appreciation of how difficult it is to grow food, whether it's apples or sweet corn or pumpkins or cucumbers or whatever, potatoes. Graduated university and fell into agribusiness. Started my career with Pfizer and spent the first part of my career with some of the large companies, Syngenta, American Cyanamid, kind of into sales, marketing. And I've always loved where innovation and agriculture come together. And 25-ish years ago, decided I wanted to try being an entrepreneur and saw this technology called the internet emerging. And I met some programmers and we started what became agcareers.com and farms.com. And grew those over the years to where they are today. And then about 5 years ago, I was deciding what do I want to do in the last part of my career. And I remembered how much help we got when we were starting farms.com from the industry. People supported us. They bought things from us. They sponsored things from us. Ginty Jokius, who started the Outdoor Farm Show, provided a bunch of marketing in exchange for some equity in the company and so on. And I thought, maybe it's my turn now to help that next generation get started in agriculture. So we formed up what's become RHA Ventures. And I sold my interest in farms.com. And we've grown to about 13 partners now with RHA. And we'll invest in early stage ag and food innovative companies and try to help them get started, get going. So the portfolio's got about 40 companies in it now. We're probably helping around 100. We haven't invested in all of them yet. And just trying to help the whole ecosystem grow. And I love bringing innovation to farmers. And I think there's so much neat stuff, whether it's AI or biotech or all these new opportunities, robotics. Try to bring some of those new things to farmers and help these little companies grow. And so, it's been fun. Enjoyed it. And, that's kind of what we do every day.
You think about the technology being used in the 30s and you look at where we are today, it makes it makes your mind kind of go mush if you think about, okay, in that same time span, say 90 years from now, what is it going to look like? And that's kind of the challenge for innovators and entrepreneurs to sort of try to have that vision and be able to execute on that.
Mm-hmm. Well, I remember my dad telling me about his prized Clydesdale horses. And I learned how to drive when one of the tractors I first learned how to drive on was one of those little Ford, gray tractors that, everybody had on their farm. So, it's hard to project 90 years. I'm trying to project out 10 or 20 years.
Still difficult.
And the technology and the software. But I was just watching a little bit on TV, the consumer electronics shows in Vegas this week. And there's all kinds of huge innovations, a lot of, self-driving vehicles, robotics, new chips, all these sort of things that you couldn't do this stuff before some of these new innovations came. So, I'm excited about what the future holds. Don't know what it looks like, but we'll try to help bring it along, over time.
Absolutely. And you talked about this intersection of technology and agriculture. Has that intersection changed? Like obviously what like what the technology looks like and what it does has changed, but do we view any of this intersection differently than we have in the past? Talk about that a little bit.
And I'd like your opinion on that too, because you've been a real innovator with on the media side. Um, I think there's always been innovation, and if you look at, we brought in hybrid crops, we brought in fertilizers. Just look at John Deere in the last 30, 40 years and what the equipments look like and the scale and the scope of it. I think innovation and agriculture have been hand in hand right from domestication of wild plants into crops and so on. So I think it's just continual drive to produce more food. Farmers are good at that. They're wired right from birth, do a better job each year, try to make it easier. And they need new tools to fight, you know, um, disease and weeds and pests and then the marketplaces as well, right? I think it's part and parcel of farming is, how do we do a better job? How do we get more out of our farms? How do we improve them? How do we do better? How do we make more money? How do we survive in tough times?
Yeah.
So the challenge with some of the innovations is they're so disruptive that they're very risky. So, are you going to go out and buy $1 million carbon laser weeder for your farm without it being tested? Chances are no, right? So um, some of this stuff's going to take a little while to, come to the marketplace and make sense. So, but I think the farmers intuitively know that research innovation is important. It's just sometimes they're so busy, they wait for Shaun to test it. And then once Shaun's proved it out on his farm, then all right, I'll adopt now.
Yeah, it's that word of mouth situation, right? Looking across the fence,
Exactly.
I was like, "Hey, Joe, what is that machine with the lasers on it? Could I borrow it, or where do I get my own?" And what's kind of different about agriculture, especially if we think about it in the broad acres sense, there's one cycle per year,
Sure.
and I can't afford to screw that up because you've got some sort of fancy innovation that you're trying to work through some of the bugs.
Yeah.
And I've only got, 30, 40, 50 cycles in me, and the risk is already high. That is one of the new things about the implementation, the adoption of technology in agriculture is this fact it's once per year.
Absolutely. And it's high risk, right? You can't screw up on 100 acres, let alone 1,000 acres. And those are big mistakes, and you always remember them, right? So
Oh yeah.
I think that's part of the challenge of bringing new innovations to agriculture, and I think we just need to be continually improving. Those little companies need to watch that they don't run out of cash, that they test it out on real farms, get it working well, and just be patient. Which can be a challenge when you're a little company and getting going.
I think also, Joe, there's like a little bit of a rub where farmers like, hey, if I'm going to try this, I didn't say buy it, I said try it. It better work.
Sure.
Where fail fast on the entrepreneur side and the product development side, that's kind of what you do, right? We
Yeah,
figure out what doesn't work and we try to make it better. But like those two things aren't necessarily happening at the same time. So it does kind of create that little bit of a rub of friction that also prevents some adoption.
well, and I think, and you're a good example of this too. Not all farmers have the same kind of mindset when it comes to innovation. There's some early adopters that are very innovative, and we know who they are. And they always get the first unit, and they always, they know that they're going to break them. They know that there's a cost to innovation, and yet they're willing to risk kind of smaller amounts of their money to try some of these new things. And then everybody else kind of watches. I'm blessed. I work closely with a great farmer in Ontario named Chuck Barasich,
Hmm.
and you know, Chuck's gone out and bought a bunch of these robots. He knows they're not going to work, but he also knows, hey, I'll work with these robotics companies and I'll break them and say, hey, you need to strengthen this, fix this, engineer this differently, take this pulley out, do that. And he knows that he wants a role in helping bring that innovation to the farm. So, and they're scattered everywhere across North America, and they're kind of fun to hang out with. And we're lucky we have a number of those guys.
Right. Yeah. And I think sometimes farmers underestimate how important it is to the entrepreneur to have access to those people,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah,
To somebody to provide that real mud and on the ground in the soil or in the barn kind of feedback that really helps the entrepreneur develop a better product or service or whatever whatever the technology is.
Well, and a lot of the future ones are engineers and computer science folks that are not from a farm. Maybe they're from a big city, could be San Francisco, could be
Yeah.
Toronto, could be Waterloo, Ontario. How the heck are they going to, take things like artificial intelligence and make it valuable for farmers if there's a gap there and we don't find a way to close that gap? They're guessing. And so, and they don't know the challenge of growing a crop in Lethbridge, Ontario, or Lethbridge, Alberta is different than Chepstow, Ontario.
Yeah.
So I think we need to make sure we have mechanisms in place if we want these technologies to help us grow our business and innovate and bring all these improvements to agriculture. We need to find ways to kind of bridge that gap.
Well, you use your laser or your robot with lasers killing weeds example.
Hmm.
Timing, timing
That's right.
in
That's right.
anything is timing's critical.
Yeah.
And there's some really good innovations that people have had, and they just had bad time. Maybe a little bit too early,
Yeah.
right? I'm sure you maybe been a part of some of them, possibly, or you've definitely seen some that have been out
Sure. Yeah. Absolutely. And weeds are a tough one, right? The you know get a rain and away they go. And if you're not in there and all of a sudden they're too big, there's lots of issues. So yeah, those are some of the fascinating things with innovation that it just takes research and smart people problem solving until they get something that's kind of practical for the farmers.
Yeah. But but it's unfortunate though because it was, somebody had the idea
Hmm.
and they had a product, but they were maybe 2 years too early,
Sure.
right? Like that's that
Yeah, I ran out of cash or or
well,
something.
and cash flow and managing that burn is super critical for the entrepreneur. That's like yeah,
Yeah.
that's
Yeah,
like
timing's part of life, right? It's a couple of years later, a couple of years earlier, a couple of years, like that's where the winner is kind of right place, right time, and a little bit lucky.
yeah.
Um, you know, help you survive.
But for people that are in the entrepreneur space and they're in this innovation area, a lot of them come to you for some some of those people, young people now are with great ideas are coming to you for mentorship.
Yeah.
What's a common question or a common conversation that you're having with many of them?
Probably first of all is who's the farmer on your team? Because we want that gap to be really tight. So if there's a farm kid on their kind of senior team or on their engineering team, that's helpful. If not, they need to go out and find somebody and hang around a farm or hang around a greenhouse until they understand what it is they're actually trying to solve the problems for. So making sure they have that deep domain knowledge, I think, is really critical. Uh, The second piece is their financial acumen. Um, Startup businesses are super hard to grow, and a lot of them fail because they run out of cash, they tie up cash in the wrong places. They're not good at, the financial side of things. And so we always make sure they have, really solid financial literacy, so that they know where money goes and how easy it is to spend and how hard it is to make. So those are usually two of the first places. And then we try to spend a lot of time. Will people pay a dollar, whatever it is, to use their tool to solve a problem? And can we make the economics kind of fit together so that the laser weeder saves them time and money on their crops, and or the robot that's doing the weeding, is it better than, in a horticultural crop, having a crew of guys walking through your fields with hose? So, those are sort of some of the things that, we have to make sure there's an economic opportunity, and they can kind of solve it with this.
Did, there's lots of different types of entrepreneurs, but I'm going to just simplify it into two strains.
Sure.
One, high technical expertise, no farming experience
Yeah.
versus farm kid that has an innovation solving a problem. Does one of them have an advantage?
Yeah. Yeah.
Really?
The farm kid.
Really? How come?
Yeah, because they're smart and they'll figure it out, right? And they'll read up on, AI and software, and they can find that kid that they can bring onto their team to bring them that expertise. So the problem is there's so few farm kids left anymore.
Yeah.
Um, they're gold when you find them.
Yeah.
So
Okay, that makes sense to me. It's and so it's for the people that didn't grow up in the industry that have a innovation. It's how do we bring them into the tent? This really warm pool, this welcoming industry that we have. We always talk about how great it is.
yeah,
Sometimes we're not very good though at
no,
bringing those people in with a high rate of efficacy.
we're not that good at it, right? Because
Yeah.
it's so intimidating. And I see it in their eyes when we bring in these young engineers. They've never been to a farm show before. Everybody else knows everybody. They're all friendly. These kids come in and it's like, holy cow, they're almost overwhelmed.
Mhm.
And so that's where we need to onboard them, and get them feeling good about helping produce food, right? And doing something, kind of noble. Yeah, no, it just takes time, um, and I tell them, come to trade shows, watch Real Ag, do things like that, go to YouTube. They can immerse themselves over time, and then hang out with farmers, go hang out with Chuck, ride around with him in his equipment. Then all of a sudden you have a feel for, all right, that's how he sprays and takes care of his weeds. That's how he plants his crop.
Yeah. What what role does failure play in creating innovation?
Well, what was it? Edison said, I didn't fail. I just had 7,000 experiments that didn't work. Um, I think it's pretty important because research doesn't, you don't, I know you're a baseball guy. You don't come to the plate in the major leagues and start stroking grand slam home runs at your first at bat. So I think it's a little bit like, you have to learn, as you go, and you probably learn more as long as they're not death blows. You learn more from what didn't work, and it's part of research and part of innovation. So I know we hate failure, but I think it's an important piece of, dusting yourself off, and what's the next version look like, and what's the improvement, and how do we continually problem solve and keep innovating and keep, all right, we got to get our costs down, we got to get our speed up, we've got to get our make it bigger, make it smaller, you know um handle clay soil better than sandy soil. So I think the failure is just part of the process, and we can't be afraid of it.
Yeah, I was gonna say, do we appreciate it enough?
I don't think so. And I think, we're so, we want things so quickly. Um, Sometimes the patience and, being sad about losing money on something, it's part of life. And I think, most farmers have had a bad crop or they made a mistake or they did this or that. And they always remember those lessons, right? So failure is just part of agriculture, part of life. And I don't know. What do you think of that? Like, I think failure's part of it. You've been a great entrepreneur. Not everything you've done has, you know, made money right on the first cut, right?
Oh, well, also been a victim too of like, oh, that part's gonna come, and not,
Yeah.
oh, don't worry about it. Being
Yeah.
it's that internal optimist, right? It's in the disc profile, I'm a pretty hard I, right? You're idea guy, you're the visionary, and
Yeah.
you need some implementers around you, and you also need some people to ground you once in a while. I think
Absolutely.
I think that's an important part on any sort of a team where there's this entrepreneur that's this driver, and they're really good at like the grind and the pushing for just keep on going. You're committed, but once in a while you do need some grounding forces around you to be like, okay, dude, like just let's
Not going to
pause
work.
for a
Move
second
on.
here. Yeah, we need
Pivot.
to let's change this trajectory here a little bit. Let's, like you said, let's pivot.
Mhm.
I think that some people aren't afforded that kind of a resource around them,
Yeah.
unfortunately.
Well, where you start and where you finish are two different places, and sometimes where you thought you were going to go, there's opportunity that present themselves. So, it'd be interesting to see what 15 years ago, what the real ag business plan looked like, and what it looks like today,
Yeah.
compared to that, right?
Well, yeah, I think it's like that for farmers, right? Like you did you think, your operation looks like this? Do you think back 15 years or 20 years, did you see it going this direction? Do you see you
Yeah.
doing this or this diversification or this increase in size or this scale down? Well, no, I kind of didn't, and like I think that's a business thing, not just necessarily for the innovator for sure. So that's failure.
Yeah.
What about defining success? Because and the reason I ask that is because the frustration I hear from a lot of farmers is, okay, like that technology is cool, it's neat, it's flashy,
Yeah.
it's kind of fun,
Yeah.
but does it actually give me an ROI?
Yeah.
And that's the part that I
Yeah.
sometimes think we're not very good at describing or being able to communicate.
Yeah. And if, you can't show a benefit, it doesn't go very long. Eventually people kind of fade away. So, showing that ROI, showing that benefit, showing the savings, I think is really important. Um, and it just takes time. And I kind of go back to when we were getting started with farms.com. I would ask people, do you use the internet? No. Do you have a smartphone? Yes. Do you use apps or do you check your markets or weather? No, 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 no. And they had just never experienced, so they didn't really know what the benefit was going to be. And then, you show them, all right, here, I'm going to download this. Now you can see all your markets there. You can see your weather there. And you thought you'd give them a $20 bill because all they had to do is press one button. It was easy. And they wanted the markets, but they didn't know how to get there.
Yeah.
And so sometimes you have to listen to them on, all right, what do you really want? But sometimes they have to experience it. Somebody was telling me about the first year they had auto steer on their tractor for planting. Their dad was like, I do great rows. Um, I don't want any of this stuff. Son went and bought it, put the $25,000 on there. Uh, End of season happens. The dad goes, you know what? This is the first year I don't have headaches from concentrating so hard to have straight rows.
Hmm.
Um, and plus we could go all night. So, he had to experience it before he knew what the benefit was going to be and the return on investment. So I think that's where we just need people to have an open mind, try it, watch the neighbors. If the neighbors are making money and they're doing it over and over and over, chances are that innovation has some value, maybe not the same value on your farm because you might be smaller, bigger, less specialized, but because everybody's different, right? They've got to do their own analysis. 100 acres of onions, the value of weed control when you have weed resistant weeds in 100 acres of onions is a lot different than 100 acres of wheat. So, they have to do their own homework to see, where that value proposition fits and do their own homework so that, in their heart and in their head, they see, all right, this thing's advancing my operation here. There's a benefit to it.
That makes so much sense to me because I think most farmers are they like things that are tangible, and that that feeling it and seeing it part really I think it for kind of the standard characteristic of what we think a farmer is. I think that really holds for sure. And
Sure.
it also speaks to what you just said. Man, if you're curious, what an advantage over the neighbor or other competitors. Like if you can stay curious about ways to improve through, new things, not every new thing, but
Yeah.
new things that work for you, boy, what an advantage.
Yeah, and I think that's a trained trait, right? That's not something that maybe we all have as little kids because what's that? What's that? What's that? And I think that can be trained. And I think if we know that that's valuable, it's something we need to just make sure our young farmers are thinking about. Not that they're reckless, but that they're open to new opportunities and new possibilities and know things are going to change because if you look back, 100 years, we had Clydesdale horses and little Ford tractors, right? So that's going to be different in 10, 20, 30 years forward. So I love that curious note. That's a good one.
So you were talking about, where something ends up versus where you thought it was going to be. I'll ask you about farmers and the internet and how we use the internet in agriculture to go back to a younger Joe Dales and what you thought as you applied your vision. How close are we to that reality?
Probably beyond what I thought it could do,
Really?
because yeah, well now everything's on your smartphone, right? And one of our mutual friend farmers, I was at a meeting with him, the one in Saskatchewan,
Mhm.
and he's looking on his phone, and there's seeding, and you can see his operation from remote. Calls into the guys and said, "Oh, did we get rain? Because I see the one unit's not working. Oh yeah, it was too wet. We got rain on that field." So you know, a few years ago, that was a pipe dream, right? So I don't know. I think it's only going to speed up information, data, sensors, software, better computer chips. We're still going to have to produce a physical crop and move it physically from, Alberta to the market. But it should give us all kinds of neat new tools and toys going forward. So, and 25 years ago, our phones were like phones and our computers were expensive and farmers didn't have computers for the most part. So
So a phone was
um,
in a bag
a
at one
phone was in a bag or bolted into your trunk, right?
point.
So
Antenna on top of the truck and all
yeah,
sorts of.
yeah, yeah. So that's not that long ago, 20, 25 years ago. No internet, no websites. Even this, doing these podcasts on Zoom is fairly recent technology, right?
Yeah, well,
So
the pandemic helped with that, the acceptance of it too. Like
agreed,
that's
agreed.
another thing where external events assist in people's adoption. Like
Sure.
before,
Yeah.
you should, Sean, fly to London, right? So I'd fly. What we would have done is we wouldn't have used the technology because we had a certain view of how of the technology. I would have flown to London,
Hmm.
Great to see you in person,
Yeah,
but
yeah,
we would have spent the afternoon, did this, and I
yeah,
would have flown all the way home,
yeah.
right?
Crazy
Things,
for
yeah,
10 times the cost and wear and tear and all that sort of stuff. Yeah, I know.
yeah,
I
yeah,
know.
yeah.
It's amazing. Yeah, so I'm still very bullish on the technology. I think there's still lots of things that can be invented and lots of new tools that can be developed that can help farmers. And now all of a sudden they have access to the libraries and the knowledge of the world and the markets of the world from, anywhere in the world. So it's I don't know. I'm encouraged.
You mentioned data. Has has big, there was for a while there was like big data, big data, big data, big data. Has that lived up to the hype we've given it? Have we underutilized it? How do you view data?
Um, yeah, I think hype is always an interesting thing. Everybody gets excited because climate field view hits the marketplace and maybe it wasn't quite as disruptive in the short term as everybody thought, but it's the million little things that kind of add up, and it doesn't really stop a glacier from moving forward. The technology and the knowledge is there, and so I think today we're generating more data than we've ever done because there's more, sensors and software and easier ways to move the data than ever before. And I don't think that's ever going to change because, the tools are getting easier, the companies are investing in them, the research is happening. So, um, was it something that was hugely disruptive? Maybe not, but it wasn't too many years ago that you didn't buy very much on Amazon, and now,
Yeah.
you know, a lot of people lean on, buying stuff and having it shipped into your house. So, and that trend's not going to end either. So I don't know. I very interesting times, and I think some of this stuff gets hyped up too fast. But then when you look back 5 years later, 10 years later, you kind of end up in the same place. It just didn't happen in big strides.
Yeah, we are in some ways like it's because of our short attention spans. The average person has an attention span now of like 7 seconds.
Yeah,
We're almost as bad as a goldfish.
yeah,
And we have these expectations that things are just going to happen. And when they don't happen as quickly as maybe when we're reading or we're hearing or maybe our own self created timelines, we're like, fail.
yeah,
But it's just we had the wrong timing again being everything. We had
sure,
the wrong runway. We need a little bit
yeah,
more runway
yeah,
to to make it all work. The thing about data that interests me is we continue to figure out more and more how to collect it. Like, all the talk about sensors and, especially from a soil health perspective or moisture, all this stuff. You talked about the telematics on where the machinery is going and what you're doing. You're watching this cool stuff. The part that I think a lot of people are still trying to figure out on the farm is, okay, that's really interesting information. It kind of reminds me of our internal meetings. We look at some of our audience data.
yeah,
Like so many people watched that video and they came from this place and
sure,
they stayed for this long. That's all interesting.
yeah.
So what? Like what do we do with that to make better decisions so that we can replicate the outcome that we just experienced? That's the part that's really challenging and trying to figure that out.
And it's probably a million little things, but you guys, when you look at your metrics and it probably tells you what's popular with your audience.
Mm-hmm.
So let's do more of those topics, fewer of those other topics. And it helps you kind of streamline your business and I think the farmers, as they get better at crunching their numbers and seeing, and the tools are there, they'll understand where they're making their money, because we can go more granular from the whole farm made this amount of money to all right, maybe we look at each field and we know the yield and the yield maps, and we can say, all right, where it was really green, we made a lot of money. Where it was red, maybe we need to do something different. And so I think it just will help us drill down so that we can become a little bit more precise, make better decisions, on smaller things than just have one color and it's black.
Right.
Does that make sense?
It does. I think one of the agricultural challenges, though, for people is, and a greenhouse is different because it's a controlled environment.
Sure.
Okay. But uh, back to the annual cycle thing, like a car plant, you're getting data from yesterday's manufacturing, and we got this one little machine that's not doing what's supposed, like, it's like every day is a new day. We're just building
Yeah.
more cars. We're in
Agreed.
growing a crop's a season long thing.
Yeah.
And that's where it becomes harder sometimes to apply what we
Totally.
learned to this year's planting to next year's, because, well, the soil's different, the moisture's different,
Totally.
you know what I mean? That's
Well,
the really,
moisture, it's a biological system. And if
yeah.
you've got moisture, you have a crop. If you don't, doesn't matter what you do unless you have irrigation, right?
Well, and it's not an excuse. I think it's kind of exciting. Like it's
Yeah.
a real
Hmm.
heavy lift and a challenge to figure it out. And if you can
Yeah.
figure that kind of stuff out in your operation,
Hmm.
you're you're way
Well,
ahead.
they're playing with it. Like we've got more weather stations than ever. We've got more soil sensors than ever that detect moisture, so that if you're splitting on fertility, you can do some of those things. So,
Yeah.
um, yeah, and hopefully, that's the problem with one crop a year, as opposed to a greenhouse or like a mushroom operation. You put a mushroom picking robot in there, it's going 365 times 24. Like it's going all the time. So the returns on something like that, and those will be the places that get the kind of the first automation where there's a lot of expense, a lot of people, manual intervention, and maybe your farm in southern Alberta, and maybe it'll come in the next or the third generation of this technology when the costs get low enough, and we have the systems there so that if you're only using it once a year, it doesn't really matter.
So if you had to predict the future, some of the next big things in ag tech, what are some of the things that excite you?
Yeah, I think robotics. There's a lot of money going into it. I think data is going to get easier as we figure out these new things called AI, intelligence.
Yeah.
If the data is there, things can be crunched and it'll spit things out for us fairly quickly. So I'm encouraged by that. I don't know how it works, and I'm not really sure where it's going to go, but all my instincts are telling me we've got to keep an eye on those things. Um, Biotechnology still has lots of opportunities, especially as we can apply data crunching to some of those things so that they can maybe move variety development forward quicker and easier. Um, and just unlocking the potential of some of these new tools in ways that holy crap, who thought of that? And there's maybe value creation there. So yeah, I think there's just waves and waves of neat stuff coming down the pipe that we need to pay attention to, and hopefully help kind of vet them out so that they're practical for the farmer, and can help him or her grow better crops more profitably, right? And more productively and higher quality and whatever.
Yeah, because at the end of the day, if the farmer can't make more money, and that, it sort of goes, it could be the most coolest thing in the world. If it doesn't, if the end customer isn't finding success, you got to reinvent.
Not sustainable.
It's not
You
sustainable.
sell it once, and that's not good for most people.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's a fascinating time. You mentioned artificial intelligence, and that's another one where we're in that cycle right now of, a lot of talk, hype, maybe accurate hype. It's what it looks like 5, 10 years from now, and which is that is growing at a rate. Like I heard that, what it cost them to develop open AI, to develop ChatGPT, and what, new lots are being built for in places like China. It's like a fraction of the cost. Like it's insane how fast that's moving.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And who knows what it's going to look like in a few years. So,
Yeah.
yeah, we're still going to have to put a seed in the ground, hope it gets rained on, keep the weeds off and keep the pests off, and then harvest it. So some of these things aren't going to be hugely disruptive to agriculture, um, the physical component of agriculture, but it could be to everything else in the whole supply chain, right?
To wrap up here, for farmers hesitant to adopt new technologies, or maybe they're trying to improve their adoption process, what advice would you give to them to navigate the challenges and opportunities of trying to evaluate innovations?
Well, I think just, watch for those innovations. You guys cover it at Real Ag. You go to the trade shows and just look for the new stuff and just not be you don't want to wake up and be disrupted, right? So just keep an eye on it. You'll hear from the neighbors, you'll see what's going on out there. And just have an open mind and commit a little bit of time and maybe some resources to experimenting on your farm, knowing that maybe new crops and new opportunities and new ways of growing the crops will happen over the next 10, 20, 30 years, right? So I encourage them to just, there's lots of resources out there where innovation is showcased, whether it's farm shows or whatever, and just have that innovation mindset.
Stay curious, like it.
Stay curious.
Yeah, absolutely. Hey,
Mhm.
Joe, this has been fantastic to catch up and talk about a topic I know you are just so passionate about. You spent your career in. Thanks so much, and hey, all the best to you.
Yeah, thanks, Shaun, and appreciate this. And yeah, if people want to hunt me down, they can find me on Twitter and LinkedIn, and RHA Ventures is our website. So happy to share thoughts with them.
Yeah, I encourage everybody to do that. Find Joe on LinkedIn. For sure. Hey, this has been another episode of the Bushels and Bytes podcast brought to you by Kane, presented on realagriculture.com. Make sure you check out further episodes wherever you get your podcasts or on our Real Agriculture YouTube channel. Until next time, cheers, everybody.